Hello, the Pioneer viewers. We're here with the latest developments in the shadow of war. Since the beginning of the conflict, there have been many dramatic events on the ground. However, despite the Kremlin's best efforts, some facts cannot be hidden. There are major ruptures on both the military and psychological fronts of the war, and the manpower crisis at the front is becoming increasingly evident. Not only the depletion of ammunition and military equipment on the battlefield, but also the diminishing will of the soldiers to fight has become a critical problem. Moscow is offering its troops a variety of incentives to stem the disintegration of its army. Salary increases, expanded social benefits, promises of freedom to prisoners. But all this is not enough to change the realities on the front line. Russian soldiers on the ground are facing the brutality of war and making increasingly radical decisions to survive. Recently, there has been a significant increase in the number of Russian soldiers surrendering. In the coming minutes, we'll discuss in detail what is happening on the front line. We'll examine what is demoralizing to troops on the ground, the state of mind of Russian troops caught in the middle of the war, and the stunning truths told by soldiers who have taken refuge in Ukraine. We'll also examine the Kremlin's strategy to prevent this unraveling and how the Russian leadership is dealing with the situation. We'll share with you all the details of these critical developments behind the scenes of the war. Now, let's take a closer look at what's happening on the front lines and this big wave that's affecting the course of the war. Before we get into our report, a quick reminder. The Pioneer team is completely real. None of my teammates or me are artificial intelligence. Even though AI is very advanced, it's still not as good as us. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our daily reports and explanations. We do read all the comments you leave on our videos, so please continue to share your ideas about our content. Tell us in the comments what content you'd like to see on the Pioneer channel. And now let us begin if you're ready. The Pioneer reports. With the third year of the war behind us, the dynamics on the front line continue to change dramatically with each passing day. New evidence is emerging that the Russian military's willingness to fight in the war between Ukraine and Russia is in serious decline, particularly in recent months. Russian soldiers have been tracking Ukrainian drones and surrendering to Ukrainian troops. The increase in the number of these incidents is considered to be one of the most tangible indicators of the collapse of morale and war fatigue in the Russian army. In a remarkable incident recorded recently, a young Russian soldier spotted a Ukrainian drone hovering in the sky and followed it to Ukrainian positions. The soldier dropped his ammunition and surrendered unarmed with his hands raised and was taken to a safe area by Ukrainian troops. It's reported that such incidents are no longer rare. On the contrary, similar cases of surrender have been reported in many different areas along the front line. Such developments, which show that the willingness to fight among Russian troops has recently decreased significantly, also reveal that Ukraine's psychological warfare methods are effective on the ground. As the internal dynamics in the Russian army are becoming more and more complex, the situation for the soldiers fighting on the front line is becoming more and more desperate every day. Logistical problems, insufficient ammunition, wrong strategic moves, and lack of leadership have significantly weakened the motivation of Russian soldiers to fight. In particular, soldiers sent to the front line without adequate training have become more interested in the surrender process carried out by the Ukrainian army using drones and various propaganda tools. This clearly demonstrates the lack of discipline and coordination in the Russian army. There has reportedly been a significant increase in the number of Russian soldiers surrendering in recent weeks. Ukrainian Defense Ministry officials announced that hundreds of Russian soldiers have surrendered this month alone, and this number is expected to increase in the coming weeks. The Ukrainian military uses drones not only for reconnaissance and attack, but also as a psychological warfare tool. Ukrainian forces have adopted a humane approach towards surrendered Russian soldiers, emphasizing that they are safely protected as prisoners of war and treated in accordance with international law. The Ukrainian government has repeatedly stated that Russian soldiers who surrender will not be mistreated, but will be provided with safe housing, food. Surrendered soldiers can be reintegrated into society through post-war rehabilitation programs. This humanitarian approach has become one of the most important factors directly affecting the course of the war and is considered one of the most obvious signs of the collapse of the Russian army. As the war is turning into an increasingly deadlocked situation for the Russian soldiers on the front line, the surrender process offered by Ukraine has begun to be seen as a door of salvation for them. The Ukrainian army aims to prevent unnecessary prolongation of the war by increasing its messages encouraging surrender. Through brochures carried by drones, text messages sent to cell phones, and announcements over radio frequencies, Russian soldiers are told that they will not be harmed if they surrender. These propaganda methods have a serious impact in the field and strengthen the decisions of soldiers who tend to surrender. On the other hand, the rise of anti-war movements in Russia shows that discontent within the army is also growing. The increasing number of surrenders has led to a questioning of the war not only among the soldiers on the front line, but also among the Russian public. Although the Kremlin's war propaganda and state-controlled media try to cover up these incidents, images shared on social media and videos released by Ukraine reveal the truth. Growing doubts about the legitimacy of the war in Russia's domestic public opinion have put the Putin administration in a difficult position, while raising serious questions about the sustainability of the war. Russia, which at the beginning of the war aimed to quickly occupy Ukraine, is now unable to convince even its own soldiers to fight. The Ukrainian army's humanitarian policies towards surrendering soldiers continue to be one of the most important factors changing the course of the war. More and more Russian soldiers are responding to Ukraine's calls for safe surrender, a critical development that directly affects the outcome of the war. In the later stages of the war, the impact of Ukraine's psychological warfare strategies on the Russian army is expected to increase. These dynamics, which accelerate the surrender process of Russian soldiers, provide a strategic advantage for Ukraine and make the sustainability of the war more difficult for the Kremlin. So, how do you think this wave of surrender in the Russian army will affect the course of the war? How successful do you think Ukraine's psychological warfare is? Can there be a change in the Kremlin's policies once the Russian people realize the cost of the war? Let us know in the comments. We read and care about your points of view.